Alright, so now that I've been getting back into the habit of the theater experience, there's a lot of movies we just gotta kind of blow through in the next several videos. They're gonna come out one after the other, but just by itself, I figured we could go into Black Widow, which is, of course, the next MCU entry, which, like we've been saying before, and in a lot of the videos with my brother, is we're still in that place where, and kind of especially now, where every MCU movie feels like a giant event of sorts, especially since we've had this sort of year and a half break as far as movies are concerned. Because obviously the shows with WandaVision, Falcon and Winter Soldier, and now Loki have kind of been filling in that gap. So they've been able to stay alive this whole time. But not that there was ever any issue with that, but it does feel like we've kind of come back to a certain place, and there's the whole thing where a lot of people talk about like superhero fatigue and stuff like that, and it's like I think it's clear to see that we're still rolling along really nicely with this. So and then we've got a couple more coming out, at least this year, I think, and then so with all the delays and everything shifting around, I'm kind of vague on what comes out when anymore, but there's still, the whole other phase we got going on. Um, and as far as this is concerned, and its placement, because another thing involved in the delays was the whole idea that this was supposed to be pre the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which at the end of the day, it doesn't. I can't remember if they made any sort of last minute change or what, but it feels like at the end of the day, it doesn't matter too much which of those between this and that came out first. But yeah, as far as this goes, it was a case of people wondering if it was going to be that necessary. But the thing about that was this whole break that we've had, where we've just kind of been doing the TV shows, where it was like when WandaVision was happening or the Falcon and Winter Soldier. I was one of those people that was wondering, like, is it, you know necessary? Like, do we need to branch off of these side characters that much? Um, Not that there should be considered any one side character in these, especially as some come to the forefront, like Sam is, and Wanda really. But this whole idea of how much can you go off of, but obviously comic book readers know that the doors are endless and the paths are endless. And I feel like people that have doubts going into these are quickly realizing that as well. And this is no exception to that. It seems like a Black Widow movie wouldn't be that much in the grand scheme of things, because a lot of people like to say, what can Natasha do? She doesn't have, like, the superpowers or anything like that. Um, I believe she has. It's not like the, please excuse my lack of knowledge on this, where it's not the super soldier serum, but it's something akin to it, that's not as powerful, which explains why she's seems physically invincible throughout this movie, but doesn't have like the super strength or anything like that. Um, but on top of this opening a lot of doors, there was also the case going into this of going into, and I guess you could say the same thing about Loki's series, which is still going. I think it has one episode left. Um, is That's next week. But the idea of going into something where we already know the character's fate, like where we know the character's already dead. It's kind of kind of how I felt going into Solo, also. But people felt about that the way they did. But it was not only that, but I was also wondering where exactly we were in the timeline, because when I went into this, I felt like the information on that was vague, at least from what I had heard. So I was kind of thinking, like, well, you can't really. Not that Scarlett Johansson looks old or anything, or too much older than she did in the '90s, but it was like, is it gonna be like another de aging sort of thing? Because are we gonna go all the way back to the stuff that was teased in like Age of Ultron about her past, or is it gonna be a bit more current? And what's really interesting that they did here and smart is that it's pretty much both. Where it's set like it's literally right after Civil War. Like, she's basically getting ready to potentially face the consequences of Civil War. Um, but then she gets wrapped up in this whole thing that brings her past back into it, and we get a lot of the juicy details of what all was going on then. So with only one, like, flashback childhood scene in the opening, it's a hell of an opening. It's basically like, it feels like three openings in one is this opening scene, and it's incredibly well done. And really, the action throughout the whole thing feels surprisingly nonstop. Because I was a little bit put off by the runtime when I saw it. Um, no, I mean, it does kind of, it's, what's interesting, especially since you can compare some of the action scenes to it, it kind of felt like some of the later Mission Impossible movies, where not that the action isn't that good, it's certainly better than those shitty fight scenes we're having in Loki. I don't know who the hell choreographed those fight scenes in Loki, but thankfully we're not dealing with that here now. They do have much more of the sort of Winter Soldier kind of choreography, which is great. But talking about the Mission Impossible vibe, I do think when we got to stuff like Rogue Nation, it felt like relentless, like completely and totally action packed and relentless for like an hour and a half, and then it kind of reaches that point where it feels like it kind of slows down before we get to a climax. This is basically the same pacing as that, which I'm more or less okay with. Like, it would be cool if they could keep up that relentless nature, because it's kind of a weird place when we're headed towards the third act, to slow down. But yeah, I mean, we do still have these periodic moments because we do have a lot of stuff going on, with all the stuff from Natasha's past kind of coming back with all these characters, particularly David Harbour and Rachel Weisz and Florence Pugh. Um, but the way they handle that and the action feels like really it balanced enough to where there are these breaks where we get a lot of the character work, but then when the next action scene happens, it still feels like the last one just happened. So we're kind of getting all of that that we need, which is great. And they occasionally throw in stuff about, like the stuff she was doing with Barton and stuff like that, which is still kind of a little bit of a blind spot as far as what we've actually seen with our own eyes going into the series. But yeah, the more we learn and the way they kind of do that organically without everything feeling too much like exposition dumps. I mean, eventually you're going to get to a point where there will be things that just kind of feel like exposition dumps, but that's never really in a, like blatant Suicide Squad kind of way or anything like that. um, I do feel like as far as the action scenes go, there is a lot of cutting in some of them, in quite a few of them actually. And you can kind of see that in like the Falcon and the Winter Soldier and stuff like that also, where because you do kind of have two different kinds of action as far as like cutting's concerned, where you have stuff like John Wick or The Raid, where it feels like the cutting is minimal, versus something like Bourne, where the action is still just as praised, but there's a shitload of cutting. But not in like the really obnoxious straight to video sense, like not that bad. And there is a particular fight in a kitchen in Black Widow that felt a lot like they were going for a Bourne vibe, and there's a lot of fucking cutting in it. And it doesn't quite have that Bourne effect, but you can see where the effort is at least, and it's not too. It's not like those straight-to-video action movies where it's literally unwatchable, and you feel like you're going to have a seizure because somebody threw one punch. It's not, there might be a couple of moments like that, but they're fleeting, and it doesn't really matter in the long run. So I guess if any problems might be had with the action, apart from that, would be just the idea that it's that whole idea that Natasha feels like totally indestructible might leave something to be desired. Where it's like they're clearly being chased. There's a very cool villain that's introduced called the Taskmaster that has a very cool appearance, and is basically Ditto. Like it can basically do all the stuff of the other people, or what they tried to do with Wade and X-Men Origins. I know nobody likes to talk about that, but. A similar vibe as well. And there's a lot of Captain America involved. There's a shield and everything. But while they're being chased, in these potentially deadly chases, it does kind of leave something to be desired when you see, like, the car that Natasha is in flying through the air and then, like, down into a subway station and crashing upside down. And, Natasha can just walk away from it, and it's like, what exactly are we running away from if none of this does too much? But she does have Florence Pugh with her, who does seem to face damage and actually bleeds a little bit. But I know a lot of people have had problems with this, just this whole series being extremely PG-13 and bloodless and stuff like that. I don't know what you're expecting with the audience they're going for, like the full audience of all sort of ages of family and all that. So there are people that get like stabbed and sliced and stuff like that, but you're not gonna see like a lot of bloodshed or anything. I feel like we're so far into the series now, people should know that at this point, but I guess some people are still gonna get the way they are or whatever. So of course, being another MCU entry, there's the whole idea of how they're going to balance the humor, which is another thing you can get either extremely praised or extremely criticized for, and I just kind of go back and forth. Like it really, they do seem to have a problem at times as far as like just letting a moment happen without trying to resort to the humor. Um, and this does have that problem, but there is the humor actually does work for the most part, particularly through David Harbour. Um, he's really got the humor down. The problem I kind of have is Florence Pugh gets a lot of the comedy, and the thing about that is that it was a weird kind of contrast going here because Florence Pugh has amazing comedic timing, but I feel like the material wasn't working. So, so it'd be like what she was saying was never really that funny, but she had the timing down right. So it kind of felt like we were getting halfway there with her. So Pugh like really owned this, but she was really having to fight through some of the material she was given, I think. But she still managed to come out looking really good. There are some cases where it's like where it does. I do wonder like if this had come out before the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, if I would still have these problems. But when they're getting like meta about it, and there's the thing where Natasha always does her like fighting pose, and Florence Pugh continuously calls this out throughout the movie. And she like makes fun of her fighting pose, and she like tries it for herself and stuff like that. And they just make it a whole thing to call attention to their own cliches or whatever. And I feel like that would have maybe felt a little more fresh. First off, obviously, we have fucking Deadpool is doing his stupid thing all the time. So the meta thing is kind of long because obviously the way Ryan Reynolds fucking milks shit. We've explored about every possible meta cliche that we can through having two Deadpool movies already. So it already feels a little behind, but I think already having scenes in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier where they spent way too much time making fun of Bucky's stare. Like, I feel like it was in every goddamn episode they brought that up. And then, like, Zemo's head tilt and stuff like that. And it's like, now that we've had now that we've had two Deadpool movies and those moments in Falcon and Winter Soldier, making fun of Natasha's fighting pose feels pretty desperate, and just yeah, and the fact that they just keep doing it like I think that's another thing is it's not necessarily just finding the right place to put the humor, but it's like they have to like drag the jokes out. And it's like you can tell where they think they've really found a winner because it's the joke that keeps coming back over and over again, um, which is always a death knell in a lot of comedic moments. So that's unfortunate. But overall, like I said, as far as like the pacing goes and the action goes, I did find this extremely satisfying, much more so than I would have thought. Especially with it kind of taking the more kind of the vibe of the Captain America movies as far as how the plot goes, and because the plot is relatively simple, which was kind of nice, because they could have there's enough here to work with that they could have easily overcomplicated it by trying to bring too much into it. But they kind of like just kind of showed us the doors just enough to say like, this is a direction the story can go, and this is something we can go into at another time. But it more or less stayed pretty focused on what the actual story here was, and the whole Ray Winstone thing and his part in this and all that. Having a clear-cut villain and a clear-cut side villain, and this is what the mission is, and these are the things we have to do to get to that point. Many of which involve, dealing with past stuff, and with these other great new characters. The David Harbour, Rachel Weisz, and Florence Pugh characters especially. Florence Pugh's basically a co-lead, which is great because she can handle it. And there's a lot of stuff with David Harbour I really like that they went into, and they teased it just enough that that's one particular door I'd really like to go through and hear more about. And Rachel Weisz has a lot more going on than I would have thought as well. So, yeah, a lot of interesting stuff here that can take us down a whole bunch of other paths, and has, and it really didn't have much bearing at all. When I was afraid about like how much can you really get invested in this already knowing Natasha's fate, and I will say that let me be more specific. The first half, the first half of the post-credit scene is pretty much exactly what I wanted it to be. Just so, like, I just wanted it to be, like, obviously people know going into this, but it's like, just so we're absolutely clear this is where we are now, I'm really glad that the first half of the post-credit scene was what it was. And the second half tries to spoil the moment with humor, but they do open up a new door where it's like, that could be fun. That could be a fun path to go down. And we already know, like, what piece of entertainment that's going to be. But as far, and there's only the one. This does do something that I feel like we haven't seen for a while, which is, because usually the format is two post-credit scenes, because we have the initial credits and then one, and then the credit roll and then the other. But this one decided to be a little inspired and gave us another opening credit sequence. So we only have the credit roll at the end. And I want to say, there's so many movies, I'm sure I'm missing one. But off the top of my head, I want to say the only time we've gotten opening credit sequences in the MCU is the Guardians movies and the Incredible Hulk. Like I said, unless I'm missing one. But, yeah, so, and as far as Natasha's presence here, even though there's, a lot of characters that could overshadow her, it does feel like it's, mostly Scarlett Johansson's movie. I do think, Florence Pugh and David Harbour are very close to snatching it away from her. But, as far as, like, her presence goes, and the way she relates to everything around her, and then her past, and even knowing what her fate is already, it is kind of that thing where it's like, how everybody made fun of the Dark World, because the Dark World just didn't seem that great. And was like just a really weak entry in the whole grand scheme of things. But now that we've had Endgame and Loki and stuff like that, like, the Dark World's prominence in the franchise keeps getting bigger and more important. And it's like, I feel like it'll kind of be that same way with Natasha's presence in all the movies previous to this. Like, knowing everything, where she's coming from and all that, is going to ultimately add more weight to those already pre-existing moments in movies with her. So, that's kind of the beauty of this whole thing, is it's like, and even Iron Man 2, that gets a lot of shit, where it's like when we had the moments with Howard in Endgame, it kind of brought us back to those moments in Iron Man 2 when he's like, watching Howard back, and it's all kind of really bringing everything to prominence in a way, and obviously, with some of the supporting characters like Sam and Buck and all them getting their own spotlight and getting pushed towards the forefront. It's all still coming together very nicely. Like I was talking about with my brother when we were talking about WandaVision, where it's like how do you, like, obviously we had Far From Home as like an epilogue, but it was like, how do you do anything post Endgame? It's like, don't you feel like we're done? And then it's like, actually, we really don't. It really does feel like we have a brand new jumping off point that should be really fun to go down, and a whole bunch of characters that we still like. People like me who aren't much of comic readers. There's still people coming down the line that I am not even familiar with and introduced yet that are going to be major, which is really exciting. So, and of course, God knows what Doctor Strange 2 and Spider Man 3 are going to bring. Clearly a lot. So that'll, God knows how many doors that'll open, just those two together. And then we will see what happens from there. But in the meantime, yes, this is a really satisfying entry. Like I said, I'm very surprised by just how many sort of new places are open to go into, in a place where it's like, oh, she doesn't really have many superpowers, she just shoots people or whatever, or does her fighting pose or whatever. But you know, there's still plenty of places to go, which is really fun. So, yes. So like I was saying, we're just going to be talking about a lot of stuff that I've been getting caught up on recently and going down that path, and hopefully we'll be more or less up to date by the time we get to next week, when like Space Jam and that Escape Room sequel. Two sequels that I don't really know that we need, but we'll see what happens, I guess. So, yeah. So until the next thing, I think that's it.